السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. اللهم صل على سيدنا وحبيبنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. اللهم لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما. اللهم افتح علينا حكمتك وانشر علينا رحمتك يا ذا الجلال والإكرام. وصل اللهم على سيدنا وحبيبنا محمد وعلى آله الكرام. ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. Alhamdulillah, it's very difficult to follow up a talk about the Prophet ﷺ because just making mention of him should move the heart. And Imam Malik radiyallahu anhu, it was said that whenever the Prophet ﷺ was mentioned, just his name, that his actual face, the color of his face would change. And he never recited hadith standing up or walking or anything like that. I mean, obviously if somebody's giving a khutbah or a lecture, but he wouldn't. Somebody asked him once about a hadith, he was walking, and he said, I used to have a high estimation of you as a student, but I never thought you would ask for a hadith while we were walking. So he was very, very strict about that. It's very nice to see some people here, Imam Shibli, dear brother, and also some of the people here. I haven't been to ICNA for some time, and it has never had anything to do with anything other than just scheduling. They've invited me many times. It's an honor to be invited by the organization, and I have nothing but goodwill towards the organization. The July 4th conference, there's a conference on the West Coast at that July 4th weekend, and a very close friend of mine, he's actually my cardiologist, so you don't want to get your cardiologist upset with you. So he always asked me to come to their July 4th weekend, and I don't want him to put my heart in some kind of ventricular fibrillation or something like that. He wouldn't do that, but he might tell me you're too sick to travel or something like that. So, but I was looking at infiltration, and they actually had a quote from my last ISNA speech in there. So I'm going to try to be good tonight. First of all, why Islam is a good question. Why not Islam is also a good question. Try Islam is a good question. But I think it's very important for us to realize that we're in a very precarious situation. Our community is under siege, and if you don't think there's a siege going on right now, you're simply out of touch with reality. After 9/11, oddly enough, the polls indicated that most Americans actually separated the event from Islam. And one of the good things about the administration initially was to do that. I mean, لا تبخسوا الناس أشياءهم. They really did try to distance and separate Islam from the act, visiting a masjid, all those things. Those were important things to calm people down and try to place the community in the context of the fabric of American society. Unfortunately, since then, things have changed drastically. Books like this have become an industry. There's now an industry of writing books against Islam. I don't really want to encourage this by even putting the idea out, but one of the quickest ways to become a best-selling author is just to apostate from Islam and write a horrible book about Muslims or Islam, and suddenly you're on all these talk shows and you become an expert on Islam. I mean, there's people now that are experts on Islam because they wrote a book and they know nothing about Islam. They've never studied, they don't have any background, but this is the condition we're in. And taking people who have apostated from Islam, who've left Islam, and putting them forward as people to attack Islam is a very clever strategy. because you can just let them do the dirty work. It's like having, the Conservative Party loves nothing better than African American conservatives, right? Because traditionally the African American was a completely democratic caucus. Now you're getting African American conservatives, and the Democratic Party really likes to put them forward. So, and that's because, well, you see, I mean, the party, we're inclusive. We're a party of the people, etc., etc. So it's very good to use people that create this pattern disruption. Oh, well, if these Muslims don't even like their religion, that must be a bad religion. Do you see? And that's what they do. So the most recent one is this poor Syrian lady who's come out and attacked Islam. Now, one of the results of that is in a recent Gallup poll, over 50% of Americans polled, when asked, what do you like about Islam? Or what do you admire about Islam? Over 50%, in fact the majority, almost 40%, said nothing. And the others said, I don't know. That's over 50% of people in this country. Now, about 35% said, I like their devotion to their religion, which is good. I mean, that's a good, but that's a small number of people. If you have over 50% of people that have nothing to admire about Islam, that is because these people have been effective in delivering their message, and we have been completely ineffective in delivering our message. One of the major problems with the Muslim community today is that we're constantly defining ourselves by what we are not. We don't tell people who we are, we tell them who we're not. And Islam, in many ways, becomes a player in identity politics. There are Muslims that define themselves vis-a-vis the kafir. I'm not a kafir. Even though they're not practicing Islam in any serious way, just the mere fact that they're not a kafir puts them in this special category, the chosen people category. You see, so that's a problem. But then we're not constantly telling people we're not terrorists, we're not this, we're not that. Well, when you're under siege, defense is a natural response. So we have a very serious problem in this country, and believe it or not, the problem is worse in Western Europe. So if you think it's bad here, it's worse in Western Europe. It's in France, in Belgium. They're now having tests in Germany where the homophobic tests for Muslims, if you don't pass them, they're not going to give you residency. To see how whether or not how you feel about homosexuality, how you feel about this, that, or the other. I mean, these are realities. So we're moving into this inquisitorial period where people, their basic patriotism is challenged. You see, and there's a big difference between patriotism and nationalism. Patriotism is love of your country for its good, and recognizing also that you have an obligation to change the things that are wrong about your country. Nationalism is just blind belief in your country, where you're not looking at with any balance. That's not patriotism, which is why patriotism is the last refuge of a scoundrel. People will cling to patriotism. One of the things in this country, our community has failed, and I include myself in this, and I'm sure Imam Siraj and others, I don't want to speak for them, but I think I know him well enough to say this, that in previous periods, when I first started speaking in the early 90s, and that our discourse was not balanced. There's people that say, oh, well, you've changed. But if you see a tree when it's young, when it's just sprouting out, and then you come back years later and the tree is full grown, or it looks different. It's not the same. You could say it changed, but that's a natural evolution of a tree. If you're staying the same, something's wrong. You're not alive. You're dead.